Welcome, and I can actually say Happy Purim for today. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And this is where we are. We're talking here about the Asham. Frankly, this really pushes my understanding really to the limit as to what's going on here. I went over the Torah T'mima, and it's so interesting. First of all, it's interesting that the Torah T'mima is clearer in some ways than the Rashi here. And not only that, but he finds a misprint that when we talked yesterday or the day before, there's a commentary here. Let's look at here. Yes. It says V'shachatu. Let me make sure I find the place. I think this is not, I think I'm going too far back here. Let me see if I can find it. Yes, let's go. This we did. Yeah, you have to go further here. Right. It says Yishchatu, remember? And he says, here's Rashi on this, and he says, Riva lanu shchitot harbe. And that means many types of slaughterings, but that is a misprint according to the Torah T'mima. And he actually quotes, let me see if actually up here is where he does it. Asher yishchatu et ha'ol. Let's set it. Here we go. Yishchatu. Riva kan shochtim harbe. That what it really is shochtim. A shochet is the one who slaughters it. In other words, the Torah, because it uses the plural, this part we got right, that everywhere else it talks about the asham, it talks in the singular, and it doesn't talk in the plural, and here it talks in the plural. And so it's to understand that, and you'll look at this is so interesting, it says, af hagerim, that is to say people who converted to Judaism, v'hanashim, and women, v'ha'avadim, and slaves. That normally, of course, it's only males, and here it's saying that when it comes to the asham, if any of these categories of people would like to perform the actual shchita, the actual slaughtering of the animal, we learned elsewhere that up to this point, it does not have to be done by a priest. It can be done by someone who obviously has to know how to do it. You have to be an expert at doing it, but the category could have been a non-priest, a male non-priest. Here it says, because it uses a plural, according to, this is Torat Kohanim, the Sifra, that it came to include, right? The word riva has to do with inclusion, adding something else. So it says that, so when it comes to other kinds of sacrifices, it's only males, but here, women, proselytes, slaves, it doesn't matter, they're able to perform the shechita. So there was a misprint, and certainly I did, because I had not read at the time this particular Torah T'mima, it was a great surprise and wonder for me to actually discover this. And it just makes so much more sense now, and it's so clearer as far as that's concerned. And the Torah T'mima goes on to say that when it comes to the Asham offering, it is only done by individuals. And that's why everything else in this section that deals with the Asham talks about individuals. There's also a possible other misprint in Rashi that he talks about, and I will not get into that right now. And what got me to start studying, looking at the Torah Tamima, is that we may come across a Rashi today that is so complicated. I'm warning you that if you understand it, please explain it to me, or if you do understand it, perhaps you aren't following it well. Something like it's just that crazy. Okay, as far as that's concerned. Now, I don't know what happened here. There's something going on here. Oh, gosh. I don't know why this. Wow. Okay. Sorry, there's something happening here that stretched this out for some crazy reason. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's try and close this up a little bit. Let's see. Forgive me, I'm trying to get this worked out here. Because obviously it's a translation of something here that I wrote in. Okay, well, we'll get to it and figure it out. It's not, obviously I have a letter that I just missed. Let me see. Okay, let's just keep going. Okay. Ve'et kol chelbo, and all its fat, the fat of this animal, yakriv mimenu. He shall present it, right? He shall present it on the altar. Et ha'aliyah. So we haven't come across this word before, but the aliyah refers to the fat tail. And this only applies to sheep. A ram or a ewe or a lamb, no other of those particular animals, that is like goats and cows, cattle, do not have this particular fat, this fat tail, that is the aliyah, right? So the fat tail, the fat of the tail, et hachelev hamechase et hakerev, that is the chelev, this fat, this hard fat that covers the entrails. The echte haklai. Let's see if there's any Rashi on this. Yes, there is, and he's going to explain this. The et kol chelbo v'gomer, and all its fat, etc. Ad kan nitparshu imurim ba'asham. Sorry, lo nitparshu imurim ba'asham. So he says up to this point. So the imurim are the parts of the animal that are designated for the altar. They're called imurim, right? So up until this point, the asham, we never read about what parts of the asham are put up on the altar. And that's why it comes to tell you them here. The point is this, that if you read the Parsha of last week, the Parsha of Leviticus, you'll see that when it talks about the various offerings mentioned there, it talks about the parts, the imurim, it does talk about the parts that are set up on the altar. But when it comes to the asham, it doesn't mention any of these things until now here in our own parsha. So lechachu tzrach lefarshan kan, and that's why he needed to designate them here. Aval chatat, but when it comes to the sin offering, kvar nitparshu ba b'parshat vayikra. He says, when it came to the chatat, which, as I said, is linked to the asham, it's already been explained. They already were designated in Parshat Vayikra, that is last week's Parsha. And now he talks about et ha'aliyah. Lefi she'asham eino ba ela ayil o keves. He says, because when it comes to the asham, the only kind of animal that you can bring for an asham is either a ram or a lamb, or a sheep. V'ayil v'keves, and when it comes to the ram and the sheep, nitrabu ba'aliyah. They have this additional quality, this augmentation of the aliyah, of this fat tail. Even though here it doesn't say what animals, the fact that it asks for the aliyah to be put on lets us know that it has to be a sheep. So, excuse me one moment. So, let me go on. Asham. Let's go on with the Rashi here. Ve'et haklayot, the two kidneys. Ve'et hachelev asher alehem, and the chelev, that is this thick fat, this heavy fat, which is upon them. Asher al haksalim, which is upon the legs. Okay. The loins, right? Ve'et hayoteret al hakaved, and the yoteret al hakaved means the protuberance of the liver. Kaved is the liver. Ala klayot yasirena, with the kidneys, he should remove it. I believe we don't have Rashi on this, so let's go on. And I'm going to take a deep breath here. Vehiktir otam hakohen hamizbecha, the kohen should cause them to smoke on the altar, ishe lashem, as a fire offering to Hashem. Asham hu, it is an asham. And it's these two words, asham hu, that are going to generate this complicated Rashi that I have really gone over many times to try and figure out all the different little parts and how they fit together. So, and what I'll do is I may, after I've taken a look at the Hebrew with you, we can also take a look at how Sefaria translates it. Lauren, I was also thinking that possibly in your Chabad translation, it may explain things in a clearer way than the material that I had a chance to go over. I even went over Siftei Chachamim on this to try and make sense of it. But here's the sense that I can make. Okay, so the question is, what does this come to tell us? It is an asham, right? Of course it's an asham. We know it's an asham. That's what they've been talking about. So what's it telling us? What's this trying to tell us? Ad shinatek shmo mimenu. It says it remains an asham. Literally what this means is until its designation is removed from it. Okay. Limed, so what does that mean? Limed al asham. So it teaches regarding an asham, shemetu ba'alav, whose owners had died, in other words, prior to presenting the asham. If this person designated this offering as an asham and then died before he could bring it, or shenit kapru ba'alav ba'achar, or the atonement was accomplished with a different animal. And the explanation of this, and this is what I got from Svarya, that is, if the animal was lost, in other words, the original animal was lost and another one was substituted, I believe is what they're talking about here. Okay. So this animal got lost, another was substituted for the asham to bring it, okay? And so the kapara, the atonement, was achieved with another animal. Af al pi she'omed liyot damav olah, okay, even though what happens to this particular animal, remember it's been designated, it's now a sanctified animal. What did they do? They would put it out to pasture and they would wait for it to develop a blemish, okay? At which point they would then sell it. And the money they got for that animal then would be used to purchase an olah, the Kates HaMizbeach, for the summer altar. What is the summer altar? During the summer, there are not a lot of Jewish festivals. And so consequently, there was not an opportunity to make sure that there was a steady amount of sacrifices. There was a sense that you have to understand that bringing the sacrifices, it was like I gave the metaphor of a meal between the divine and human beings, that there's that symbolism involved, and to have the altar empty is like not being able to provide proper food and sufficient food. So they would try to use money from this sort of situation to supplement the offerings that were brought during the summertime. And it's just simply referred to as Kates HaMizbeach, which means the summertime altar. So we see that this animal, would be set out to pasture. They'd wait for it to develop a blemish, at which point it would be sold, and then the money used then to buy an olah, a whole offering. Im shachtu stam. So here we go. If they slaughtered this animal, if they, and I don't know if they're talking about, and where is the circumstance that they're talking about here? I am not sure. Are they saying that if this animal under this circumstance, they went ahead, they slaughtered the animal, and then the person died, or the person, or they slaughtered it after the person had died, or somehow they discovered the other animal that had been brought. They found it, something like that, right? Eino kasher leolah. Okay, it cannot be designated as an olah sacrifice. Kodem shenitak l'riyah, prior to its being removed to pasture. So you understand this pasturing, etc. So as long as it still hasn't been, as long as even though they found out these sorts of things, this is what I'm making of it, that it's supposed to, at that point, be set out to pasture, but they didn't pasture it, they slaughtered it. At that point, it cannot be an olah, all right? Even if they didn't designate it specifically as an olah. But it isn't coming to teach you, right? We shouldn't confuse this. L'lamed al ha'asham, regarding the asham, sheyehe pasul shelo lishmor. They are not saying that the asham, this is not coming to tell you that if it wasn't officially designated as an asham when it was slaughtered, in other words, at the moment they slaughter the animal, they say, Hare hu asham, or I'm slaughtering this animal for an asham, and they didn't do that, right? It's not coming to tell you that if they didn't do that, lishmor, for its sake, okay, that it's pasul, that it can't be used anymore, okay, or that it couldn't. Yeah, okay. I'm going to stay there for the moment. Kamor shedarshu hu. Okay, as they understood, as they interpreted the word who, right? It says Hasham hu, but there's also a place where earlier on it said chatat hu, right? And there it meant hakatuv b'chatat. There, where it was used in regard to the chatat, it got to mean that unless you specifically designated it as a chatat, when you, in other words, had in mind as a chatat, when you did that slaughtering, it's pasul. Back with the chatat, it means it is pasul, but here with the asham, it does not mean that. Lefi, why not? Sha'asham lo ne'emar bo, because with respect to the asham, it doesn't say about it asham hu, right? It only says it, Hashamhu, Ela la'achar haktatrat ha'imurim. It only says that after it mentioned the smoking, causing to smoke the designated parts. Okay, so here's the point. This was helpful from Safaria, and that is that if you look at the various elements that go into offering the sacrifice, let's go from the moment the animal is slaughtered. At that point, a Kohen receives the blood that is pouring into this basin. And then remember, he keeps stirring the blood, takes it over to the altar, and sprinkles it in a very designated, specific way over the altar, and then goes ahead and then takes apart the animal, fillets the animal, parts of the fat go up on the altar, etc., etc. The point is that, as we're going to understand, is that as long as he sprinkled the blood, okay, that is what affects the atonement, and not the putting up of the parts of the fat, etc., up on the altar. That does not do it. Now, the point is, it says Asham hu after the fats are brought up, okay? Whereas with the chatat, it mentions chatat hu after the blood. So the point, Rashi's pointing out that distinction of order, okay? V'hu atzmo. Okay, and here we go. The hu atzmo, the animal itself, shelo huktaro imurav kasher. And what it's saying is that even if the designated parts, the imurim, didn't get put up on the altar, it's nevertheless considered kasher. Now, this is so, as you can see, right? This is so convoluted. There are so many different parts. Are we talking here about the fact that, what happened here was the animal was slaughtered. They then, and they realized that Baalim had died, something like that, that it's set out to pasture and it's still okay? Or is he simply talking about that this animal wasn't officially designated as an asham? That's hard to understand because that would happen when they actually did the shechita. There's so much information here that for me is missing. Let me pause here and ask Lauren if you have anything in your translation. If you'd like to read your translation, and possibly with the background I've given you here, it's helpful in understanding this Rashi better.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it will be, but I can try. It's also
Take your time. Take your time. I don't have it in front of me, so go for it.
So it says the guilt offering until its name is removed from it by sending it out to pasture. And that's how you described its designation.
Okay.
And it says this teaches us concerning a guilt offering whose owner has died or whose owner has lost the original animal and subsequently received atonement through another animal. Although the original guilt offering animal stands ready, that its value in money used to buy another animal, which is to be offered up as an olat, what do you say, Kate's
Hamizbeach. Right.
Kate's Mizbeach.
Yes.
Burnt offering, which was provision for the altar, it says.
Mm-hmm.
See Rashi, Leviticus 1, verse 2.
Okay.
Nevertheless, if the original guilt offerings were slaughtered, if this has been done before they are sent out to pasture.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the law is that the animals in these cases, the animal is sent out to pasture so that it becomes blemished and consequently unfit for sacrifice. Then it is sold and its proceeds used for burnt offerings for provision for the altar. Here, however, Rashi tells us that the status of guilt offering is removed from the animal as soon as it's sent out to pasture, even before it becomes blemished. This expression, hu asham, it is a guilt offering, does not come to teach us that a guilt offering becomes invalid if it was sacrificed for another purpose other than for a guilt offering. As they expounded on the word he.
True. Yeah, right.
But it says here he.
Okay, that's fine.
In the case of the sin offering, see Rashi, Leviticus 4:24. That is because in the case of a guilt offering, Scripture states it is a guilt offering only after the sacrificial parts have been burnt. And if we say that the verse is teaching us that the guilt offering must be sacrificed for that specific purpose, not for any other, then this law must include also the procedure of burning the sacrificial parts, that they too must be burned for the purpose of a guilt offering. However, we learned in Tractate Zvachim that in the case of a guilt offering, if its sacrificial parts were not offered up at all, it is valid.
And that's the end of it?
Yep.
Oh, gosh. Well, this is an example of where you have to just go over it and over it and over it. Or you go on, or you come across something else, and as you gain more information, you start to understand this. And when you go over it again, having the further information, this starts to make more sense. You're right. It doesn't clarify every single little piece of this. I mean, we have a vague understanding of what's going on here, and that's helpful to some extent. I hope you weren't completely lost. I suspect that you possibly understand more than you think you do or realize that you do. at this particular moment. But you can imagine my dismay at coming across this very, very, very complicated Rashi, more than anything we've ever experienced up to this particular point. So the next Rashi actually makes me smile. So let's just do it quickly. We have a little bit of time, and then I'm going to have to set things up in the sanctuary. So here we go. Kol zachar b'kohanim yuchlenu. All males of Kohanim should eat it. So you see here it's saying, elsewhere it seemed to mean just the Kohen who presented it, but here it's saying, right? Any male amongst the Kohanim shall eat of it. B'makom kadosh ye'achel, it shall be eaten in a sanctified area. Kodesh kodashim hu, it is considered most holy. And this is the Rashi that makes me smile. Kodesh kodashim hu, it is most holy. And he says, b'torat kohanim hu nidrash. He tells us if we want to understand this, we need to go to the Torat Kohanim. We need to go to the Sifra on this verse, and we'll understand better what's being, what Kodesh Kodashim means in that particular context. And I'm thinking to myself, was Rashi, after he wrote that just complicated explanation, he just didn't have the energy to write this out himself explicitly. This was just such a major tour de force that he just went through that he had to take a breather. That's sort of the impression that I had. Let's go on a little bit more, okay? Let's see. Kachatat ka'asham, just as a sin offering, so is the guilt offering. Torah achat lahem, they have one law. And what's the law? HaKohen asher yichaper bo. Here we go again, right? It says the Kohen through whom the atonement is made, lo yeh, it shall be his. All right? So again, this is like one of those verses that doesn't really mean what it appears to mean, okay? And he says, Torah chat lahem, they both have the similar law, but avarze, in this respect, coming up. HaKohen asher yichaper bo, the Kohen through whom atonement is made. And that's not what it means. It means hara'ui lekapara. It means any Kohen who would be in a position to offer up this offering and effect atonement. Cholek bo is allowed to have a part. He's allowed to have a share in this particular offering. So what's it coming to exclude? Prat letavul yom. So it comes to exclude. Tvul yom means someone who has gone to the mikvah but hasn't yet the day is supposed to come to an end. He's awaiting nightfall, so he's gone through part of the process of his purification, but he's waiting to complete it. Mechusar kippurim, and likewise, someone who was supposed to bring an offering as part of his purification. So he's gone to the mikvah, but he was. And maybe it's even had nightfall, but the very next day is when he's supposed to bring this atonement offering, and he hasn't been able to do that yet. So he cannot divide amongst us the onain, and this an onain is someone who has lost a direct relative, that person has deceased, the direct relative has deceased, and they're waiting to bury the relative. That the burial, the funeral has not taken place yet. So these people are the ones who are excluded from participating and benefiting from this olah. Now, this hasham, this offering. Let me again now, I'm going to put in the bookmark here and put in the place. And God willing, on Shushan Purim, we will continue this next little piece here. Going to stop the share. Thank those who have participated. And stop the recording.